We are live. Sorry, I forgot my mic was over here. What is up, fam? Let's see. Let's probably pull this down a little bit. Give me a quick second. What is up? It's it's weird having this camera. I have to play with the height and stuff, and then also just like looking at the camera as well. I don't know. Maybe I'll eventually use this as my main cam. We'll see. Not exactly sure yet, but because I think it's a little bit better quality than, let's just go back to the main camera. So to the main camera, it's weird because it's like I can't see myself unless I have my OBS software kind of like on the screen that I'm actually looking at. And the stream, I have my stream on my second monitor over here on the right, but it's slightly delayed. So it's not like I can watch myself and be like, all right, I'm like looking at the camera and stuff. But anyway, that's like a problem that I'll eventually figure out and I'll end up fixing, I guess. Or just get used to talking to a camera and not really looking at myself. But this is the screen that mainly has my notes that I typically take and I write down and I peruse throughout my streams. So as I'm kind of reading this, then I can somewhat be facing the camera. I mean, maybe eventually I could just get a camera guy or get like a button that switches it. And I don't think I can have OBS open on both screens. Right now my CPU is running at 3.9%. So I just don't want to make the stream super laggy and choppy either. All right, but another stream tonight. Tonight we will be talking. I'm sure most of you have heard. Well, I guess a few shout outs, a few points of business before. If you haven't seen my story, I had some family members that were affected by the fires in Maui. So I've donated myself to them. I did the whole spiel, did the whole story on my Instagram story, kind of a recap. Had relatives that lived in the Lahaina, and many their houses burned down. They lost all their possessions. I lost one relative in the fire. He was in his house when it caught fire and eventually burned to the ground. But they are having trouble getting aid from the government, other agencies, insurance, and whatnot. They have to pay to replace not only all their possessions, but pay off the mortgage and to rebuild the house. And insurance is only, I believe, giving them what the value of the old house, or I'm not sure even if they did a new valuation of the house or not. And I don't even think it's the entire price of the home. Thus, they still have to pay their mortgage. So, pretty insane. They're in temporary housing right now, but craziness. So, I put Venmo link in my story, and if anyone else wants to donate, just leave a comment. I'll send it to you myself, or shoot me a DM on Instagram or any of my socials. All right, and then also pointing out, I do have my socials right here, and then for the other camera, it's right there. I always have the point left, but those are my socials, and specifically follow me on all my socials, and then I also have my fitness Instagram, Buff Asian. But specifically, I want to try to promote more of my Rumble channel. So, if you're not familiar with Rumble, it's basically like YouTube, but a lot more rights and a lot more perks to the creators ourselves on Rumble. They give us the ability to kind of own our content. So, go ahead and follow my Rumble. I want to start live streaming on Rumble so I can have dual stream on YouTube and Rumble at the same time. But in order to do that, I do need at least 5 followers. So currently I have 0, and I'm trying to have an auto syndication where all of my YouTube videos that I upload to Rumble. It was doing that for a while, but I think it started doing the older videos as well, and supposedly it takes a long time. So actually, a lot of my newer videos aren't even yet. So hopefully that gets resolved. If not, I'll find something. And like I said, just follow my Rumble account. The link is in the description. And once I have 5 followers, come on guys, 5 followers. Just even if you need a create account, no, I'm just kidding. But if those of you that have Rumble, go ahead, give me a follow. It would be greatly appreciated. Once I have 5 followers, I can start live streaming on Rumble, and I won't have to worry about auto syndication. So go ahead and do that. So shout out to my Rumble folks. But and those are my 2 shout outs that I just wanted to hit today. Let me switch back to this camera because I'm actually looking at my notes. All right, topic of the night. I'm sure many of you have heard right now lots of news with the presidential candidacy coming up next year, 2024. I always think it's this November for some reason, just because there's tons of news and the candidates are going ham right now. But I'm sure many of you heard of a couple new candidates. Most of the mainstream candidates, like obviously President Biden for the Democratic Party, and then for the Republican Party, obviously Trump, but Trump's going through his whole mess of stuff right now. So my personal thoughts, I don't want this would be like a politically surrounded live stream. Like obviously this is doing with politics, but more I wanted to focus on how they actually kind of became mainstream when talking about Vivek, sorry, I think that's actually how you pronounce his name, and then RFK, how they kind of came out of nowhere and are kind of going viral, and even the polls, obviously, there's large discrepancies between them and the mainstream still, but they're gaining actually a lot of traction. But yeah, Trump's in a giant mess. I don't think, even though I'd probably classify myself as Republican. I don't think Trump necessarily is the best candidate, would be the best president for us compared to a couple of other candidates. I very like Ron DeSantis, but he's kind of done a whole mess with this campaign too. Hasn't done what he should be. And then Vivek, I think is amazing. I think he's a great candidate. I do think he's a little young. He's a little inexperienced when it comes to political and taking office, especially becoming the president of the United States at such a young age. And I'll go into who he is if you don't know who I'm talking about. So I don't think he'll win. I think he has a chance for sure, but I think he'd actually make a really good vice president. But I think DeSantis is the clear kind of leader in far as my mind as when it comes to policy. He's not the most likable guy, and I'll get into that as well a little bit, like why he's not super popular, why Vivek is destroying him when it comes to social media and online engagement. But I think he's probably the best candidate so far, just because Trump is kind of too polarizing and he kind of had his chance type of a thing. So it's interesting what will happen in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They need to find someone to replace Biden quick. Like Biden's not gonna stand a chance. Whoever runs from the Republican side. So RFK is up there. We'll see. I haven't really been tracking the Democratic side as far as candidates as closely as Republican, but I'm sure there's a couple other candidates as well that I'm missing. So we're going to go into, all right, how Vivek and Robert Kennedy Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy and Robert Kennedy Jr., how did they just blow up out of nowhere? Like, who were these guys? You might have known RFK just because very famous family. I'll get into him after Vivek, but they just start blowing up on the internet all over social media, all over YouTube, hopping on all these different podcasts with these famous podcasters, and they're doing interviews, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, oh, these guys are kind of likable because they're going on this kind of non-mainstream media sources. So, first off, who is Vivek Ramaswamy? He was a guy who was born in Ohio, and he was born to immigrant parents that immigrated from India to the United States. And long story short, I mean, you can watch a lot of his podcasts, and he'll go into more of his background, more of his childhood. He went to Harvard for his undergrad, studied biology. He's thinking he wanted to do medicine, but he actually ended up going to biotech, pharmaceutical investing. So he worked for investment firms and basically hedge funds. And he went into that. And then eventually he did do law school at Yale, did not practice law whatsoever. I'm not even sure necessarily why he went to law school. But he ended up founding ended up being a $1 billion biotech company called, I believe it's Roy Vance. I could be wrong. Let me look that up real quick. It's Roy something. Was right, Roy Vance. And then he also has this other company. Oh, my CPU is going crazy right now. Hopefully my stream isn't lagging too much. If it is, just let me know. I can actually check stream health right here. Stream is healthy. Okay, we're doing well. All right, but Roy Vance ended up being a multi-billion-dollar company. Ran that for several years. He also started another investing company in regards to ESG, and he has this whole thing. He's written 3 books. One of his books, I forget which book exactly, he goes into all these giant flagship investing firms, specifically BlackRock, Vanguard, and I forget what the third one is, but huge. Like they own trillions of dollars in assets, and these are the major holders of most of the S&P 500 and the big companies in the stock market. And how they do that is they create these ETFs, and normal retail investors, they buy these ETFs. But when the thing is, they buy the ETF to get all of the diversification benefits of owning hundreds of stocks of different companies, but they give up their right to vote for these companies. So they'll basically buy a bunch of shares and then make these ETFs and then kind of split the price fluctuations between all these different millions, hundreds of thousands of different retail investors, but they retain the ability to vote when it comes to governance issues, when it comes to the board of these different companies. So if you ever own like a single stock of any company, you have the ability to vote on choosing like board of directors, any governance issues, any issues that investors bring up that they have enough people to present to the shareholders. And he basically created a company where you don't give away your right to vote or you prevent them. And it's interesting. I might do a different live on this later, but the whole ESG thing, Wall Street kind of dropped that. So that's interesting itself. And the unique thing about Vivek is he's super young. If he wins the presidency, which honestly I don't think he necessarily will, but he'll be the youngest president. I believe the youngest president ever. Don't quote me on that. I know JFK was. When elected, I think he was like 38 or something. 43. Vivek is currently, I believe, 37, and then if he does become president, he'll be 38 by that time. So he'd be the youngest president ever. So he's a young guy, lots of spirit. If you watch any of his podcasts, like I mentioned, you can feel his energy and his fire to ignite some change in this country, which I think is a good thing. All right, hopping over to RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And for this, let's go ahead and switch to the other camera. All right, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's famous for his family. So his uncle is the famous JFK, John F. Kennedy. that was president of the United States, was the youngest president of the United States. Tragically killed, assassinated in Dallas, Texas, while he was president. So he's the nephew of JFK. Also, his dad and his other uncle, they're very famous in the political world. So his dad was a senator. His other uncle was a senator as well. His dad, the original RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, he was also assassinated, like John F. Kennedy. And RFK, he was an interesting guy growing up, kind of like a recovering drug addict, and was doing a bunch of crazy stuff when he was younger, but then kind of dedicated his life specifically to environmentalism and promoting and fighting against specifically companies that were harming the earth. So he became an environmental attorney, author, and a huge environmental activist. And then also, he's very famous for his ideas on vaccines. So while he was a lawyer, he co-founded a nonprofit organization focused on protecting water bodies from pollution, advocating for clean water. I think the biggest lawsuit they won was against DuPont. It was like for $630 million or something like that. And like I said, he's mainly known for his big controversial view. He believes that vaccine cause autism, and then of course with the COVID vaccine, there's that whole thing on that. And he's also a big proponent of climate change and fighting climate change. And he's currently 67 years old. And if any of you have seen his podcast or kind of seen stuff he's done interview wise, then you notice that he has a little bit of a speech impediment. So he has a speech disability that causes him to kind of talk the way he talks. And I think he kind of was diagnosed with that, kind of started developing like in his midlife, I think. But that's a little bit about R.F. Kennedy. Now, to the point where maybe you knew RFK before because of his stances and his ideas towards vaccines. Honestly, I haven't really heard of him before. I'd say the average person probably didn't know who he was. And now that you kind of see his name, you're like, oh, okay, he's related to JFK or whatever. I didn't even really know who his dad was, to be honest. But Vivek, on the other hand, definitely probably didn't know who he was. Even though he was a billionaire, then he still probably didn't know who he was. This young, super smart guy that went to Harvard, went to Yale, founded a billion-dollar biotech company. So that kind of goes into how did they become so famous and so viral? Why are they popping up over the place? Now here is the big point that I want to hit, and the reason why they kind of blew up and came out of nowhere, as compared to even to an extent Trump. Granted, Trump kind of he was the father of this, kind of going out and marketing himself the way that they currently are. Granted, his marketing schemes is like any publicity is good publicity, whether it's good or bad. You know, he's kind of crazy. He definitely is crazy, but typically, if you looked at past presidents and kind of how they campaigned and stuff, it's through very traditional senses. They would raise money, they'd go visit states, and granted, the Vivek and RFK are doing the same thing that normal candidates are doing, and they would go on like the CNNs, they would go on the Fox Newses, they'll go and meet with specifically well-renowned reporters, maybe do like 60 Minutes, and then eventually when it gets to the actual candidacy, they'll go on national stage and debate each other. But what Vivek and RFK have really done differently, like I said, Trump did this a little bit, specifically with Twitter and stuff like that being probably the most engaged president ever on social media, for sure, just because it's a relatively new thing. But what Vivek and RFK did specifically is they went outside traditional media sources. So they went they didn't just go on Fox News. They didn't just go on CNN. They didn't just go on meet with Megyn Kelly and all these different renowned Democrat or Republican journalists that, and not just like newspapers and stuff like that. They met with untraditional sources of media. So they went on a ton of YouTube podcasts. They went on a bunch of other different podcasts. Like RFK was on Joe Rogan. I can't remember. I don't think Vivek has been on Joe Rogan yet, but Vivek has been on countless Patrick Bet David's podcast, the PBD podcast. He's gone on to the Breakfast Club, all these non-traditional media sources, and especially they're big on like Instagram. I'm not sure TikTok. I don't use TikTok, so that's a possibility. But they're huge on Twitter just because they're constantly tweeting, and it's not just their campaign manager tweeting. I actually, it seems like it's them actually tweeting. I could be wrong. Their PR person really good at making tweets. Definitely a lot better than probably Joe Biden. But this, I just bit my tongue. Now that's a clip. Hopefully no one clips that. But that is the key to how they blew up, and that is how the world is changing. Definitely. Instead of going to the traditional sources of media, which I think are eventually going to die, like they'll still be around, but they won't be as influential and impactful just because they've kind of discredited themselves so much with just a bunch of fake news over the past decade, that these untraditional, which are going to become more traditional, the YouTubes of the world, the Twitters of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the no, I wouldn't say TikTok. I think actually I haven't heard a lot about TikTok, so I thought it was just going to be banned, but who knows? But the untraditional sources of media, and then not only that, but partnering up with influencers, going on influencers podcasts, and really making a name for themselves, relating themselves to the average person. Just because I'm sure even when they hop on these podcasts, they're making sure nothing kind of gets leaked that accidentally got said or something like that. But even to that extent, I'm even sure they're probably not cutting out very much stuff at all. Versus the traditional media sources, they're probably super strict on what they release, what they cut, and stuff like that. So that is the key. Untraditional sources of media, which will eventually become the sources of media. And I think we're seeing a big change. So basically the whole premise of this live is these people got big, and all these people, a lot of these people are not just them, presidential candidates. I think they're a very key example just because they literally kind of came out of nowhere and are now running for the highest position in the United States government, which is crazy. But the power of social media and the power of untraditional sources of media, if you can leverage it effectively, then you can essentially just go viral and become world famous in a super short amount of time. That's why I'm always talking about content and leveraging content and putting yourself out there. Because, for example, for me, I'm not really big right now. Maybe I'll be big in the future, hopefully. But that's all one part of kind of my business plan per se. Because eventually I'd love to run my own business and kind of do my own thing and run multiple different businesses. But in order to do that, obviously a lot of companies, in order to sell stuff, they need eyeballs and they need people to buy it. And in order to get people to buy, they have to make sure people know about their products or their services. So if you have a really big presence on social media and these different types of media sources already, then whatever business you have, obviously you need to make sure it's good product, good service, and it's quality, right? But you don't have to pay for advertising. You don't have to pay for another influencer. You don't have to pay for ads. Just because you have a big enough following, you can even hop on other podcasts and become even bigger and kind of tap into different markets. For example, and hopefully I'll eventually want to do this. That's why I don't want to be the interview guy. I know a lot of people like they do podcasts and they get people on the show and stuff. And I don't want to be known as the interview guy because I think that limits myself dramatically. I want to be the guy that does my own thing, but then can also go on other people's shows. For example, if I want to tap more into the fitness industry, I can hop on someone that has more of a fitness audience than say me. Or if I want to hop into the, let's just say, political space, probably not, but let's just say political space, and I can hop onto someone's show if I'm big enough and I provide enough value to their audience that I can go on there and I can tap into part of that market. So I think it's really interesting. It's going to be interesting how kind of the presidency, the candidacy plays out, and how effective they'll actually be to the big guns of Biden, Trump, and DeSantis. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. And like I said, the purpose of this was to show how untraditional sources of media can literally from zero to hero. Like no one knows who you are to everyone knows who you are, and people are starting to believe that maybe you're a lot more credible than people probably should think you are. And that's not saying they're being fake or anything like that, but like I said, Vivek, like, and I think that's one of the downsides and one of the disadvantages and weaknesses he has is because he's not very familiar with the political system. I mean, he might be familiar from like a law perspective and from an education perspective, just because he's a very intelligent person, but he's never been in office. But he's getting major attraction, more traction than a lot of the other candidates, at least from a eyeball perspective, an attention perspective. And once you get people's eyeballs, you can persuade them for sure. And granted, like I said, like you look at the polls, and I actually thought Vivek was going to be a lot higher just because I see him all over the place. But you also have to take into account there's lots of boomers and older people probably don't watch any YouTube, don't watch social media at all, and know kind of their typical. I know I know Donald Trump, I know Ron DeSantis, I know Tim Scott, type of people just because they've been in politics for a long time and I hear them on the radio all the time. So hopefully I can, and even Top G did this. He leveraged untraditional sources of media. Granted, he did it through a different way, through affiliates and having people post for him and for them to benefit. And it was a win-win situation for both parties. And he just blew up overnight, became the most Googled man on earth. So I think you should try that. I should try that. Anyone who has business should try that. These are prime examples. And also advice for, obviously Trump's going through all this stuff right now. Biden, I think, is probably, I don't know, is mentally able to hop on a podcast. I know he did a podcast with Jay Shetty. Actually, never seen him do a normal podcast, but Jay Shetty came to the White House. Granted, they probably cut and filtered the heck out of that. That'd be awesome to see the original footage. So actually, it'd be interesting to actually see that whole podcast and that whole interview. I actually probably watch it after this. I watched a bit of it, but other than that, DeSantis, he got interviewed by Megyn Kelly, but Megyn Kelly's kind of like a renowned like Republican journalist type of person. But he hasn't hopped onto these other hopped on like the PBD podcast. He hasn't hopped on to Joe Rogan. He hasn't hopped on to the Breakfast Club and a couple of these other sources. And the interesting, I like what Vivek is doing is he's going on these different shows, not just the right leaning shows because he's running as a Republican, but even the left leaning shows like the Breakfast Club where they're giving him a lot of heat, but he's able to respond and debate and to disagree with people. Granted, that does show a little bit of his weakness, so it'll be interesting how it leads to the actual debates because I think he will advance to the Republican primaries. But we will see. All right. Well, that's about it for tonight. So for Thursday night, I was planning on doing, let me check what it was. So on Thursday, I was originally planning on talking about cars. So actually, recently, it's funny. I've recently been getting really into cars, and I've been watching the Fast and Furious series for the first time in my life. Like, I know it's crazy. So ever since I kind of like ordered my car, I kind of started looking at cars more frequently and more in depth. The more I've kind of been intrigued, and obviously, I'm not going to spend all my money on car stuff, but I hope to be successful and I plan on being successful and probably get some toys in the future. But I was going to talk about not specifically just one car, but like the three types of cars I think every guy should own. These are definitely, I think, practicality, functionality, and also for fun. I think it makes a lot of sense. This is what I plan on doing once I acquire enough of the funds and in a position where I can buy multiple vehicles. But I was going to talk about that on Thursday night. The thing is, Thursday's crazy, crazy day for me, work wise, and then after work, doing like an intern reunion from the people that interned at my work last summer, and then straight after that, institute at the church building, and then after that, they're wanting to do Barton Springs. So literally, my whole day's shot. So I will probably stream on Friday. I think that makes the most sense, just because tomorrow is a quick turnaround. I need to do my men's value tip tomorrow, and then Friday it'll be a little bit more chill, and I think I'll be able to prepare because I don't have a ton of work stuff I need to do. So plan on Friday. I will be doing my next stream. It's going to be the three types of cars every guy should own. So as for everything, trying to help you guys get stronger, smarter, healthier, wealthier. So go ahead, fall for more lives, fall for more tips, and like I said, give me your recommendations. I'll probably do a couple polls. I've been thinking about that lately. A couple polls on my Instagram to see kind of what live content people are wanting to see more. And yeah, I'm almost at 600 followers on my main Instagram and close to 250 my Buff Asian. So I mean, I had a goal by the end of the year to have 10K followers across all platforms. Still got 4 months, 3.5 months, and all it takes is a couple viral stuff to go out, and growth can be exponential. So we'll keep grinding away, keep seeing what works, what doesn't work, and experimenting a little bit. But thanks for tuning in tonight. Leave your suggestions if you want to see a specific topic. And once I kind of get the viewership up, like I said, follow my Rumble. Follow my Rumble. Once I get 5 followers, I'll start live streaming on there. But maybe eventually I'll bring back the Q&A too, and I might even do just a Q&A night once I get a little bit more viewership because it's been kind of low lately. That's my fault. I will try harder, have more interesting topics. But I think this is a pretty interesting topic. But I will catch y'all later.